Okay, in the last few months, there's been quite a lot of activity of the Department of Justice against JP Morgan, which is a big bank in America. And the particulars of this are the rigging of the precious metal prices. But as we shall see later on in this video, that this applies to all markets, including housing markets, because everything has been rigged, and everything has been rigged using the same techniques and the same corrupt individuals. So although this might appear to be technical for some people, it actually affects everyone. None of us is free of the damage done by these crimes. Well, anyway, a number of JP Morgan traders have been prosecuted for rigging precious metal prices, and they've basically grassed up their executive. So now Michael Nowak, the JP Morgan Chase managing director and head of the bank's global precious metals desk, who's also a board member of the London Bullion Market Association, he's been indicted and charged with manipulating precious metal futures contracts over an 8-year period.
Where was he based? Was he based in the USA or was he based here?
USA. So this is the top bullion trading executive, who's a board member of LBMA. So this is this LBMA's function is to basically secure the trust in the price of silver and gold worldwide. And the largest silver trading bank is JP Morgan Chase, and its executive is arrested for manipulating that market. So this is a highly personal legal action. So it's not just saying the bank did it, it's actually going after the individuals, going after the executive, and the Okay, we lost you there.
Yes, it says you were using the computer audio. Right, so we're looking at Michael Nowak in the indictment unsealed 16th of September, the Department of Justice, and this is the Department of Justice in America.
Yeah, that's right. There's two agencies that are responsible for prosecuting this kind of crime. There's the regulator, which is the CFTC. Hold on a sec.
And that's an American regulator as opposed to our FCA.
Yeah, the American regulator is the US Commodities and Future. Where is this now? 1 second. Okay, the American regulator
US Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
Yeah, that's right. So that's their equivalent of the FCA. But it hasn't been doing its job, so we can figure that there's probably friends and families of the US Department of Justice sick and tired of being robbed of their life savings. And they've basically taken over the CFTC's role. And it turns out that there's a former director of the CFTC, whose name is David Meister. What Meister did was to sit on allegations from Andrew Maguire. Just bring that up. So the CFTC sat on these allegations by Andrew Maguire, who had very strong evidence that JP Morgan had been manipulating precious metal markets for 5 years. They closed down their investigation And then this Meister chap, he resigned within a week of that investigation being closed. And it was closed when Andrew... Lost you again. I lost you again.
What is going on here? Right, so he was a commodities dealer. So this Meister chap was a commodities dealer as well.
No, this is Andrew Maguire.
Right, Andrew Maguire is a British commodities trader and whistleblower.
Yeah.
Presented evidence to United States regulators, and you're saying after the investigation was completed, within a week he had resigned?
Within a week of the CFTC closing their investigation based on the evidence given to them by Andrew Maguire, David Meister of the CFTC resigned. And then Meister joins the legal firm, and then that legal firm happens to defend Michael Nowak, who's JP Morgan's director, indicted and prosecuted, and who's his personal lawyer, none other than David Meister. So David Meister, who was charged with basically investigating the likes of Michael Nowak and then finds no crime, turns out to be his defense lawyer after Meister resigns from the CFTC. And of course, when he is his defense lawyer, he's getting a big fat contract for himself and his law firm from JP Morgan Chase. So this looks like JP Morgan Chase bought off Meister with a promise of big contracts if they shut down this gold and silver investigation, which was based on very strong evidence.
When was the actual investigation initiated?
I think that was 2000. He was interviewed. Andrew Maguire was interviewed on 2010. 2013, he did another interview with CBC. So I guess the CFTC would have had these allegations by then.
Right.
I think they closed them down around about 2014. What happened was Andrew Maguire went public on the Max Kaiser show. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, within about a week of that, CFTC closed down the investigation. Now that happens to parallel with my lawsuit, because in my lawsuit, I sued Anshu Jain of Deutsche Bank for gold and silver rigging, and the bank, Deutsche Bank, was under investigation by a regulator called BaFin.
Called
BaFin.
BaFin.
BaFin. Yeah, they were under. So Deutsche Bank were under.
What did that stand for then?
It's some German nonsense. It's a German regulator. So the German regulator investigates Deutsche Bank from 2013 to 2014. Within 48 hours of Deutsche Bank receiving litigation papers from me, in other words, they were served a lawsuit by email, BaFin closed down the investigation against Deutsche Bank. So it looks like to me that Deutsche Bank probably telephoned the bosses of BaFin and told them to shut down the investigation.
So these are not real supervisory authorities then, are they? They have no teeth at all, because they're in the hands of basically the banksters.
They have teeth, but the teeth are owned by the banksters. So technically they have powers, but in practice the bosses are handpicked by the leaders of the countries in which these regulators sit. They're handpicked so that they serve the banksters rather than the general public. Now, what's of general interest is that Michael Nowak and others were accused of something called spoofing. With spoofing, what you do is you submit an order to buy something. What that does is to instantly create demand, and these things are done on electronic systems, so the response with the increase in demand is almost instantaneous. So with that demand comes an increase in price. Electronically, then their orders are instantaneously cancelled. And what that does is to stop anyone transacting at that price, but the price remains. So it's almost as if these electronic systems have been built to enable spoofing. So if you very rapidly create pairs of these spoofing transactions, you can actually get a price to go very high or very low over microseconds. So you can cause flash panic, apparent flash panic buying and apparent flash panic selling without any transactions going through a system. Now this is interesting because this is the general mechanism which banks use to manipulate everything. So it's used to manipulate interest rates and foreign exchange instruments, but also if you have, say, in the case of the GRG fraud from RBS, and here we can see that there's no FCA action against RBS. The GRG fraud was the Global Restructuring Group. What they did was to deliberately missell mortgages to people and then have their own surveyors devalue the mortgages. So they either overestimated the price of something and then had the surveyors give a realistic price, or they sold something at a proper market price, but then had a surveyors give a sub-market price. And what this does is to force mortgage holders to go into negative equity. Now, mortgage holders generally have to pay a large deposit, and they pay various fees and a number of payments. And the bank, by forcing these mortgage holders to go into negative equity, have reason to call in loans. So they end up with the property, and they end up with all of these deposits and initial payments. So they've got everything that they want and more, and they've gone out of their way to destroy small businesses and individuals. So this is a heinous crime, and as you can see, the FCA says it's not going to take any action. And from what I've heard is that some of these GRG victims have gone to courts, and their complaint is that they have whiz-kid lawyers who basically befuddle them and cause the lawsuits to fail. But I think the more likely situation is that RBS have systematically bought off judges, and they've probably bought into how judges are selected, so that their favourite judge is basically always the judge in those kinds of lawsuits, so that RBFs never lose. This is the damage done by GRG is something like £80 billion. So £80 billion worth of mortgage fraud. That's a lot of bankruptcies. That's thousands of people made bankrupt. A lot of them committed suicide. Their lives are ruined. Their children's lives are ruined. The courts have not given anyone justice apart from Noel Edmonds. And the FCA and the Serious Fraud Office are doing absolutely nothing to rectify this scandal. So that should be of critical importance to everyone, because we all have, those of us who aren't homeless all have a roof above our heads. And whether we pay rent or a mortgage, this mortgage interest rate manipulation is responsible for us forking out month by month much more than we should do. And even when the truth is known, none of us gets compensation from any of these banks that have been shown to have been manipulating mortgage interest rates for years.
Yes, I mean, that's when Spank the Banker's film was released earlier this year, and that's all to do with this mortgage fraud, isn't it, with one particular lender.
Sure.
And as you say, Noel Edmonds has now taken a back seat because he's, I think he's had some compensation, has he not?
About £5 million, I think. But as soon as he's won, he's out of it, and he's. I don't see him helping anyone other than himself, which is a shame. Yes, these.
It is a shame, but he live in the UK, doesn't he? So, right, so DOJ, who would have thought that JP Morgan's precious metals trading desk is the functional equivalent of the mafia, and that its one-time leader, Blythe Masters, was the mafia's don? So this is an article dated 17th of September 2019. So, well, almost everyone who don't mind being designated a conspiracy theorist for years.
Yeah.
And now comes vindication, because this has just been confirmed by the DOJ, which accused the PM trading desks at JP Morgan of being deeply involved in what prosecutors described as a massive multi-year scheme to manipulate the market for precious metals futures contracts and defraud market participants.
That's a multi.
It's really shocking, isn't it?
Oh, sorry, there's a bit of hiss.
It's really shocking.
Yeah, that was I mean, the precious metal market is in the trillions, and the precious metal market is the counterbalance to fiat currency. Let's have a look at Zimbabwean hyperinflation.
Zimbabwean hyperinflation. Okay.
Can't see it on my links. So in Zimbabwe, they've got almost no precious metals in bullion. They might have some mines, but they're all owned by the Rothschilds. So, and Mugabe I think he ended up a billionaire, didn't he, just before he died? So anyone who says that, oh, it's the West that ruined Zimbabwe, and Mugabe is some kind of communist hero, or communist.
You're on about Robert Mugabe.
Mugabe, yeah. Mugabe ends up a billionaire, and what do communists say? That the means of production should lie with the Communist Party. So Mugabe, or Mugabe, whatever you want to call him, ends up with all the all the solid currency, and everyone else gets Zimbabwean currency. What's the inflation rate in Zimbabwe? 79.6 billion% month on month. So it's a monthly inflation rate of billions of percent.
So how are the people in Zimbabwe managing to feed themselves with an interest rate of 79.6 billion%? And since, you know, Robert Mugabe had all the commodities.
Obviously, there's raw barter, apples for oranges, that kind of thing. Then you have theft, robbery, starvation, and it all ends in disaster. And they ended up having to use other people's currencies. So you get some apologists from Mugabe saying it's the West's fault, but they end up using the West currency for what the communists have done to Zimbabwe. So if you think that communism is the solution to kind of out of control capitalism, then have a look what Mugabe did to his own country.
Okay.
Communism is not a solution. Communism is consolidation of wealth into the hands of a tiny power elite. That's what it says in the Communist Manifesto. The means of production end up in the hands of the Communist Party. You can argue that what we've got around the world with oligarchs controlling everything is a form of communism in which the Communist Party is invisible. So think of that as a crypto-communist cabal of oligarchs. We're told by Antifa that the enemy of Antifa is fascism. Fascism was invented by Mussolini. Mussolini saw what Lenin did to his own country, and what Mussolini realized is that if you take the means of production and you give them to a party apparatchik, if I pronounced that correctly, who takes that power, has absolutely no experience in using it. What it does is to ruin the means of production. So what Mussolini did was to go to the oligarchs in control of all of the big businesses, the means of production, and told them, you are now subordinate to the state. So what he did was to create a new system called fascism, which is basically just communism in which the communists are wealthy oligarchs. So when you see Antifa fighting fascism, it's one set of oligarch wannabes fighting the established oligarch. So it's just crypto aristocracy. They just want to steal the crown from people so they can stick it on their own heads. So anti-fascism and fascism. Anti-fascism is basically communism. Communism and fascism are two types of wealth and power consolidation. And that's basically what JP Morgan are doing. Because JP Morgan, when they are doing this spoofing, if you read it for yourself, the reason they spoof is that they can spoof prices down, say, and their own clients are contractually obliged to sell when the price is sufficiently low. That's called a stop limit. And that takes the contract and moves it back into the hands of JP Morgan. The clients who have left a large deposit with JP Morgan lose that entire deposit. So this is a wealth consolidation process that takes money from the relatively poor, the clients of JP Morgan, and puts it into the hands of JP Morgan's masters. So you can think of JP Morgan as a communist or a fascist organization. You have all these banks working together in a super cartel. So what we're living under can be described as fascism. Existent oligarchs running a crypto-communist state. And we're all victims of that.
Okay.
Is this too political for you?
No, this is fine. This is fine.
Yeah. Okay, now JP Morgan might sound a million miles away, but remember that this Nowak character is head of the LBMA, which is in London. Now,
right, so we're straddling the two countries now. So we've got a guy who is part of American commodities dealership and with a London bullion market.
Yeah, now the LBMA sets global prices. So basically, JP Morgan can do what they want, but the actual published silver price is determined by the London Bullion Market Association. So he's helped manipulate a price, he knows it's manipulated, and then he's helping set the global figure in London for the price of silver and gold.
Wow, okay. What influence is that then?
JP Morgan were a defendant in my lawsuit for rigging precious metals. And what I want to do is show you the defense that they provided. Because, yeah, this is JP Morgan's written defense to accusations of gold and silver rigging manipulation. They're starting off by filing to have my lawsuit struck out, saying that it's vexatious. So basically, they're petitioning for a restraining order against me to stop me accusing them of rigging silver and gold markets. This is back in 2015. So as you can see, I'm not ambulance chasing what has recently happened. This predates the news from America by 4.5 years. So 4.5 years ago, they put their signature to have a petition to get a restraining order against me to keep all of this secret. So let's have a look at this defense. They're basically piggybacking on to Deutsche Bank's defense. They're piggybacking on to Deutsche Bank's defense. Deutsche Bank have already been paying fines to the CFTC. Now, if you look at their defense, I believe that Mr. Taylor has no real prospect of successfully establishing that any such conspiracy has ever existed. So they don't deny that they've been conspiring. They just say that
They just say you're not going to win.
Yeah, you're not going to win. So obviously the executives who'd have signed off this defense would have known that their markets were rigged. So this is a complete legal evasion. So they knew they were guilty. They say we trust Emma Slatter, who's the general counsel for Deutsche Bank. We agree with everything she says. Well, they turn out to have been rigging the bullion markets and have accused them of audit rigging. And they agree with everything she says. And they've been rigging the markets and spoofing entails rapid cancellation of orders, which should appear on any audit for detecting spoofing. How do you detect spoofing? You just see if an order has been cancelled before it was passed through. And if this happens a lot, then you know that there's systematic spoofing going on. And if it turns out that an order is cancelled microseconds after it's been submitted, then you know that's electronic spoofing, not manual spoofing. So their auditors would have known that their own audits were fake. The directors would have known the audits were fake. A few weeks ago, we did a video where Jess Staley overrode his own auditors at JP Morgan when he worked at JP Morgan. This was Epstein's friend. His own auditors were warning him about working with Epstein, and he overrode his own auditors. So the auditors are lost connection. Okay, welcome back.
This is going to be for auditing, editing. So Jess Staley is, we must remind the audience that Jess Staley is the current chief executive of Barclays Bank PLC, and we don't seem to have seen any movement in Barclays removing Jess from being chief executive, do we?
I suspect the MI6 is behind that. There's a story released today on the Times that I'm not subscribed to, so I don't have the full story. But MI6 are apparently or reportedly worried that Russia have the inside info of what went on between Epstein and Staley. Sorry, Epstein and Prince Andrew. And if you remember, the Times reported that the Daily Mail was leaked emails from Epstein that threatened Parliament if it did not appoint Jess Staley. So we can figure that Epstein had the blackmail material on Prince Andrew. That blackmail succeeded in getting Jess Staley appointed. Jess Staley was a very close friend of Epstein, who owed everything to Epstein. And MI6 know that Prince Andrew was blackmailed. They know that Staley won his appointment as a result of that blackmail, and Parliament has used its privilege to stop the truth coming out. From my latest FOIA to Parliament, as we saw last time, they used their parliamentary privilege to stop those Epstein emails being leaked. So there's serious blackmail and a cover-up, probably by MI6. So I don't know how long MI6 will keep this up, but I certainly don't think that they've got jurisdiction to do this kind of thing. We don't employ secret services to cover up paedophile rings. That's not, as a taxpayer, where I want my money to go. I mean, they should be chasing people leaking nuclear secrets, or trying to publish launch codes for Trident or something. Not keep blackmail secret. I mean, they could have done Bullion, couldn't they? If he was such a threat to national security. I mean, he was a sleazy paedophile giving money to the Clinton Foundation, which is a child trafficking organisation. So anyway, we've got this document from J.P. Morgan putting all of their trust into Emma Slatter of Deutsche Bank because she's a good girl, and Deutsche Bank is a good business who would never rig precious metal prices, according to their defence. We know that their defence now has to be a pack of lies because they've been rigging the market for 8 years. This document is 5 years old. So they've been rigging the market for at least 3 years before this was written. And they were rigging it at the very top, their chief executive of metal dealing, who would have had to have been consulted on this lawsuit. So obviously they've sent a pack of lies in their defence document to the courts. They've had a restraining order, one against me, which is a clear conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Now it turns out that the Lord Chief Justice, Sir Ian Burnett, issued 2 court orders against me, saying my allegations of silver and gold rigging are totally without merit. So it's case closed. So this man, who's now the Lord Chief Justice, he sits in judgment over this proroguing of Parliament. He was alongside Terence Etherton and Justice Sales, and those pair were alongside Baron Thomas in the original Gina Miller hearing. And if you've seen my video with Caroline, a few months old, you'll know that Thomas and Jeremy Wright were both compromised by Deutsche Bank. This lawsuit incriminates the executive of the judiciary for a cover-up of bank frauds. And the current Lord Chief Justice and his predecessor were both deeply involved, and they were both deeply involved with both of Gina Miller's lawsuits. It was Gina Miller's original lawsuit to stop government having its say about Brexit without Parliament being able to second guess it. And now she's had a second lawsuit, and it's the same corrupt cabal of judges, Sales, Etherton, and Burnett this time, all of whom have basically covered up Deutsche Bank fraud against the European people. One of the reasons I voted to leave the EU was because I believe that the entire ECB was predicated on the solvency of Deutsche Bank, and I believe that Deutsche Bank was collapsing, and I believe that it will take the ECB with it, and then it will take the EU. And the last thing we need is to be anchored to that and have to deal with the problems of our own banks. That was primarily why I voted for leave. So what Burnett and Baron Thomas and Justice Sales and Justice Etherton are doing is trying to dig their anchor into us, make sure that none of us can get compensation, and basically swallow us down into the void. And I can't fathom what his motive must be. I mean, he must know that Deutsche Bank is insolvent. I mean, all of these politicians must know that the ECB is basically kaput, and yet they all want us at the heart of Europe. It's
Well, I guess they're still printing money, aren't they? I mean, they're still doing the quantitative easing, and so whilst that continues, whilst nobody stops them, But of course, the banks are not in it for our national governments to be supported. I mean, they're in it just for themselves to make money. And, you know, if they collapse tomorrow, I mean, we're just seeing at the minute, aren't we, about Thomas Cook? It's been going, what, 178 years.
Yeah.
And now they're asking the government for money to bail them out. Well, if you and I went into partnership and we set up a business, could we go to the government and ask them to bail us out?
When you say the banks are in it for the money, remember that by bank, we sometimes mean the board of the banks, sometimes mean the shareholders. But what we don't often appreciate is that those executives are handpicked by someone else. For example, Staley was handpicked by Epstein, and Epstein was probably handpicked by Ghislaine Maxwell and her Mossad crew. So when we think of these banks as just being greedy, on the one hand you've got these traders at JP Morgan spoofing for personal gain, but it was done systematically and it destroyed many clients, and there may well be another motive other than simple acquisition of money. Purpose might have have been to destroy clients rather than to make money. Satan, you see,
A blackmail situation.
because this is whether or not you believe in the devil, the fact is that there may be something in the realm of the mind in some higher dimension in which minds are linked together in some way. So this might be, for example, how composers can write music that is intelligible to other people. If you listen to classical music, the slightest nuance is as intelligible, say, to a Japanese man as it is to an Austrian or an Englishman. And yet, if they try to speak in their own native language, it's all gobbledygook. So at some psychological level, well, at some spiritual or higher dimensional level, our minds are linked in some way. And I believe that there's some kind of what you might call evil or satanic gestalt, which is a kind of group mind that is the quintessence of what we call evil. Evil is a real thing. We're not just assemblers of proteins and sugars. There's more to existence than just molecules. And there's perception, there's language, reality, existence, truth. All of these words defy definition. Entire libraries have been written to try to define any one of them. And yet these are the very foundations of our day-to-day existence. So philosophy is a difficult problem that hasn't been solved for thousands of years. The problem of matter has not been solved. If you believe that science is a closed book, look into dark matter. Every galaxy violates known laws of gravity. In some cases, there are galaxies that have a 90% mass discrepancy. And nothing we've done on Earth has detected missing mass. So we are far from understanding the matter around us. We might only be perceiving 10% of it. Or, alternatively, we only appreciate 10% of the phenomena, and 90% of the phenomena is unknown to us. So do not take human consciousness for granted. And what I see in all of this is a pattern of evil at every level. It's like a fractal. You look at the small scale, which is spoofing, someone being ripped off, and then you look at the larger scale and you've got a whole load of people being ripped off, and then you can see it done at the national level, you can see it done at the spiritual level, you can see it done as the human species. And if the human species is put in this universe in order to propagate human culture in the future of the universe, then this is an attack on human culture. Because everything that we've done of value, all the great literature, music, philosophy, science, politics, all of that can be destroyed by this. It can go to ashes, can all be made meaningless. What value is there in a poem if there's no one to hear it and there's no facsimile of it? It makes human endeavours meaningless. There was an attempt to suck back, in my opinion, some of the powers of the devil, and this was the English Bill of Rights of 1689. And the devil at that time had a name, and he was the Pope. And one of the high priests of the devil was James II of England. And what James II did was take the ban of arms, because weapons have been banned throughout history, and people were banned from using weapons. But what he did was to make sure that Catholics never had to worry about the law, so they could break the law and carry weapons, and he'd make sure that the judges wouldn't prosecute them. So Catholics at that time were a bit like where the bankers are today.
They were being protected then?
Yeah, they were protected by James II, who basically told the judges, do not enforce the law against Catholics. So the most important act in this sub-act of the English Bill of Rights was to give Protestants, not Catholics, but Protestants, the right to bear arms. And this is important because this is what rights are all about. Sometimes we're told that rights are given by God, other times that they exist metaphysically, and if you deny that someone has a right, then you're treated as some kind of monster. But in the 17th century, when they were giving people these rights, there was no real philosophy of rights. They weren't, as far as I can tell, they weren't really part of a religious body. You had the Ten Commandments, you had the Bible telling you how to live, but there doesn't seem to be, as far as I can tell, this concept of rights within the Bible. So this wasn't a biblical concept. It wasn't even a philosophical concept. But the politicians were sick and tired of the Catholic tyranny, and so they gave Protestants these rights, which basically meant a right from Parliament, meant that you could tell a judge where to get off. So basically, it was a way of saying that there's a body of law more powerful than the arbitrary edicts of a judge. So that a judge who was biased couldn't be unfair to a particular party. So these rights emerged as a human response to the tyranny of the Catholic Church. And that's my belief of what rights are, is that they're a human response to the tyranny of the times, And so you give people a right to protect them from the tyranny of the times in which you live. And the English Bill of Rights is still existent, it's still in effect. You're interested in the English Bill of Rights, aren't you, Caroline? You've commented today on them. Hello?
I am. I raised the matter though on Facebook. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. But could it be seen that the Bill of Rights was just to lull the British people into a false sense of security? Because after that was passed, look where we are today. Look at all the acts that have been passed by Parliament. We have broken our English Constitution. We should not have people in Parliament who haven't been Parliament, who should be total Christians. They're not supposed to be Jews, they're not supposed to be Muslims, they're supposed to have been here for generations, but we are breaking all the rules. And in actual fact, we are now finding ourselves occupied.
I think my feeling is that the English Bill of Rights were kind of golden age of the legal system, because they just had this James II character. Everyone was sick and tired of the Pope and the shenanigans and the endless war between the Catholics and the Protestants. So for this sweet spot in history, the Protestants were united in basically taking power away from the Catholics. And that's what this English Bill of Rights was for. And it's interesting.
So through history, the Protestants took power.
Sorry? Sorry, what was that? Caroline?
So the Protestants were actually taking power away from the Catholics.
That's what
I'm here.
That's what the English Bill of Rights was for, basically.
Can you not hear me?
I can now. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I've been able to hear you all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, you can.
I can hear you.
So basically, we now.
I've lost you then. You have to rephrase that. Still lost. This is a bad connection today. You're going to have to start again with that paragraph. Hello?
So basically, we have. So basically, we've got a situation where the actual.
You're fading away.
But yet, fast forward to now, and we've got the proroguing of Parliament, and David Starkey has been saying, why isn't Boris Johnson using the Bill of Rights of 1689?
I think I don't know if I should stop the video here and then we'll have to do a new session, because this is pretty terrible.
Shall we leave it till tomorrow night, because there seems to be a lot of breaking up of the for some reason it says that the internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, perhaps this deserves a video in itself.
Okay, so why don't we do it? Shall we go on say something like 7 o'clock tomorrow night, a bit earlier?
Okay then.
So can you see what you can make of what you've had tonight?
Yeah, we'll do.
I haven't obviously done an ending either yet.
Sorry?
I haven't done an ending for the show.
Yeah, it doesn't matter too much. I can end abruptly and then just continue on with the next.
Okay, let me just say something. I'd like to say thank you to everybody listening at home. We've ended up talking about the Bill of Rights, which is a very, very pertinent subject at this moment in time, because we have a constitutional crisis here in the UK, and people of the world are looking towards the people here as to how we solve this problem. We want to dump the European Union, but our government seems to be totally disconnected with the will of the people. So please stay tuned for part 2, when I'm going to be interviewing Mark Anthony Taylor again to finish off the debacle with the banksters, the lawyers, and the law enforcers. So thank you, and see you again soon. Goodbye for now.
Okay, see you in part 2.